First of all, I will call to order this meeting of the South Whidbey School District number 206 School Board business meeting for May the 26th. We will now move on to presentations. We have two excellent presentations that I'm looking forward to seeing. I will turn it over to Ms. Phillips and South Whidbey High School students.
Hi, Brooke, thank you. I'm checking to see if Ada, Isaiah, and Bunny are all present. And yep, perfect. Hi, Bunny. Hi, Ada. I haven't seen Isaiah yet. Thank you. I'll do a short introduction, but really this is not my presentation. It's the beauty of the group of students we have at South Whidbey School District. A lot of our training this year around equity has encompassed a lot of areas, including use of pronouns. A few years ago, a district has gone through a lot of trainings on pronouns and education in that. And I've worked with a lot of students this year, and I've learned a lot through them. And so I asked Isaiah and Bunny and Ada if they would be willing to help educate us on their experience and their knowledge and history and use of pronouns, and how to help us be more equipped with the right language and the right tools to navigate the discussions around pronouns. So I have, they presented this to the high school staff, which was 3 weeks ago, and we're still having great discussion and dialogue about the presentation they gave us. Last week they presented to the middle school staff. Great conversations and questions. And then we've asked them to come and speak on behalf to our school board. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Isaiah, Bunny, and Ada.
Hello. Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Isaiah Giffen. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm joined here today by...
My name's Bunny Sousa, and my pronouns are also they, them, theirs.
Yeah, okay, so let's get started, I guess. Yeah, would you like me to just tell you when to move on to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, great. So we're just going to start by kind of working our way up, just with like ground level knowledge first, and then slowly building on that. So we're going to start with basically what are pronouns and why do we use them? So essentially, pronouns are a necessary part of daily life. We use them every single time we interact with people to denote their preferred gender, either assigned at birth or chosen. Some people identify with the gender they were assigned at birth due to their biological sex. Those people are known as cisgender, while others, like us, identify with a gender different from our assigned one, known as transgender. Next slide, please. Okay, so how to use pronouns. As mentioned before, pronouns are used when referring to someone to denote their gender. However, with all these new pronouns and this new information circling around, it can be confusing if you aren't constantly involved with them. So we're going to start by talking about non-binary people. Non-binary people are those that remove themselves from the gender binary, male or female, instead opting to be seen as separate entities. Non-binary people, commonly referred to as NBs, although not all non-binary people identify with that term. If you'd like to use that term, it's just common courtesy, just ask them if they identify with that, and if they do, feel free to use it. But they use pronouns they, them, theirs, instead of the standard he, him, his, or she, her, hers. So some examples. Instead of saying, he went to school today, you would say, they went to school today. Instead of saying, does this belong to him? That becomes, does this belong to them? And instead of saying, is that his school? It becomes, is that their school? Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it over to Bunny real quick to talk about multiple pronouns.
Okay, so people can also use multiple pronouns. And for example, she, they, or he, they, which is something for a while, I was going by she, they, and I know that Isaiah was going by he, they for a while. And these people would most likely identify under the term demi-girl and demi-boy, meaning that they are not fully one or the other binary gender. And then also sometimes people just say you can use gender-neutral pronouns for them because they don't mind it. Gender fluid is another term on the gender spectrum. These people can alternate between pronouns more often than others, using all genders or only a select few. Genderqueer is a term used to describe anyone who doesn't fit into the gender binary, once again, male and female. And it's important to understand that gender is a broad and complex spectrum, and it's similar to sexuality in that way, that it is broad and complex. And some examples for how to use multiple pronouns are, they told me that he wants to get their hair cut tomorrow at 10, or she is such a sweet person, I want to be their friend. And then I'm going to pass it back to Isaiah for the next slide. You're muted, bro.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about what could kind of be a divisive subject, but it's really important to understand kind of the nuances in the language here. So we're going to talk about sexuality versus sex versus gender identity versus gender expression. So starting with the list, the easiest to understand is simply sexuality. That's your attraction to either the same or opposite gender, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, etc. Then we have sex. So a lot of people will use two definitions for sex. Basically, it's your biological sex assigned due to your chromosomes. And some people will say that sex is directly connected to how your chromosomes express themselves, so either male or female external genitalia. Others will say that sex is based exclusively off your chromosomes. So if we're going from the chromosomes example, there are 6 biological sexes: X, XX, XXY, XY, XYY, and XXXY. Now, all of these chromosomal abnormalities could be seen as simply variations of male or female. But then we get to intersex, and intersex makes up about 1.8% of the population, which is about the same percent of the population that has red hair. And intersex people could either have a combination of either male external genitalia and female internal, or other way around, some form of combination of that. They don't really fit in exactly in either of the categories, but a lot of them choose during their life to identify as one or another because it's easier that way. Then we have gender. Now, gender is really interesting because it's a social construct meant to categorize social behaviors into separate identities and then provide them with predetermined roles, so gender roles. So gender is basically, it's an attempt to take this biological sex and give it certain roles in society, and then give names to those roles and those expectations. Then we have gender expression, which is simply how an individual presents themselves to the outside world in relation to how society perceives gender. So for example, someone with a female gender expression would present themselves very traditionally feminine. So, skirts, dresses, makeup, all that stuff. Whereas someone with a traditionally male gender expression would present themselves masculine. And then there are also those with androgynous gender expressions, which present themselves as somewhere in between. So next slide, please. So we're going to go into a little bit deeper the nuances between gender identity and expression. So I'm going to say a couple of statements, and then I'm going to elaborate on each of them. Identity and expression are completely separate. Non-binary people do not owe anyone androgyny, and it isn't anyone's place to question that. And we should be calling people their preferred pronouns despite how they look. So identity and expression are completely separate. I touched on that a little bit earlier, but basically all it means is that just because an individual identifies a specific way doesn't mean that they're compelled to express themselves in that way. And it's not your place to question that. You should just be calling people what they want to be called. Non-binary people are traditionally seen as having to look androgynous, and they really don't owe anyone androgyny. Being non-binary is more about your personal relationship with gender, and it isn't really anyone's place to question that. Also, we should be calling people their preferred pronouns despite how they might look. And when it comes to addressing any individual, it can be kind of hard to get into the habit, but you should always be asking their gender before making any assumptions because gender and expression can be so separate. It's also important and inclusive to introduce yourself with your name and gender when meeting a new person so they know how to address you and to help them feel more comfortable if they might be trans. And a really easy way to do this is just, I can see a lot of you guys have, just putting your pronouns right next to your name in Zoom meetings or when you send out emails, just signing your name and your pronouns afterwards. Even though you might not think about it a lot, it goes a really long way towards making a normalized and inclusive society. Next slide, please. And I will hand this over to Bunny to talk about some history.
Okay, thank you. So one thing that I've noticed is that there's a common misconception that all these terms and ideas about the gender spectrum are a new thing. And it is true that we use new language to make things more inclusive and make it fit our generation better. But that doesn't mean that genderqueer people aren't heavily involved in our history. And I found some examples of transgender themes and people. And so here they are. Traditionally, Native American two-spirit people were male, female, and sometimes intersexed individuals who combined activities of both men and women with traits unique to their status as two-spirit people. In most tribes, they were considered neither men nor women. They occupied a distinct alternative gender status, and that was from the Indian Health Service. Next, the Hira is a third gender in India that has been around for thousands of years. Hindu Hiras were mentioned in ancient epic stories, and Muslim Hiras were once the guards of mosques. Their important place in Indian history can't be ignored, and that's from Listverse. And then next is the Kosek, were men who dressed in feminine clothing and performed exotic dances for audiences throughout the empire. And despite their gender-bending appearances and feminine dance moves, the Kosek were not trying to impersonate females. Instead, they were a third gender who embraced both their masculine and feminine features. And that's also from Listverse about the Ottoman Empire. And so we can see that through many ancient cultures, there has always been a third or multiple genders aside from just the binary male and female. Next slide, please. And so next up is some scenarios and best language to use. The example that I like to use to explain non-binary pronouns, they, them, is what I call the wallet analogy. For example, someone lost their wallet. That's what you say when you find a wallet, because you don't automatically assume someone's gender. And they told me they lost their wallet. Also, instead of saying you guys or ladies and gentlemen, you could say hello everyone or y'all, because it's gender inclusive. And it's really that simple. When we don't know someone's gender, we use gender neutral pronouns. And also, like Isaiah said before, it's important not to assume someone's gender because of how they appear physically. And also, normalizing pronouns is a first step to an all-around more accepting environment. So next slide, please. And here's some language to best support transgender students in the classroom. It's important when you accidentally misgender someone not to make a big deal out of it, because this can make the person feel worse about it and make them feel like they're a burden for just trying to have their pronouns and gender respected. Here are some phrases not to use. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm just not used to it yet. This isn't very bad, but it is a very common one that I personally hear a lot. You just have to remember that the person is not asking for excuses. Just correct yourself and move on. Also, I didn't say that. You don't look like insert gender. And I'm a terrible person. I'm so awful. And that one might sound a little drastic, but it has happened before. And like I said before, just correct yourself when you misgender someone. For example, they said that they wanted to go to the movies tonight. Next slide, please. And this was a slide that was made by our friend who's here with us, Ada Murray. And so this is additional information. Some people use pronouns besides he, him, she, her, or they, them, or a combination of those. These pronouns are often neopronouns, and some common examples of these are sie, zim, and it, its. For example, sie las their bike, and it walked to its house. And you should never use it, its pronouns for a non-binary person unless they ask you to, because some transphobes will call people who use they, them pronouns by it, its pronouns in an attempt to hurt them and take away their humanity. And also, although neopronouns are not very common in our district, it's still good to learn about them and understand that there are people who are more comfortable using these pronouns than the basic ones we've covered during this presentation. Next slide. And does anyone have any questions for us?
And I'd like to pop in here real quick. I noticed that there was a question in the question and answer section. And since it's like directly applicable to the slide that I talked about, I'd just like to address it real quick because I think it's a really great question.
Absolutely.
So Lorinda Newton from Clinton asks, where does the X, XXY, XYY, XXXY come from? I know there's an extremely rare condition where a person may have both male and female sex organs, but it is very rare. So to address the first part of that question, X, XXY, XYY, those are all just chromosomal abnormalities or birth defects. For example, looking at XXY, that's commonly known as Klinefelter syndrome. Basically, it's just where a male has an additional copy of the X chromosome. Primary features are infertility, poorly functioning testicles, and just a couple other little symptoms. And it's kind of along the same lines with the X, XYY, XXXY. The reason why I mention that is because a lot of people say that sex just has to do with your chromosomes. And I think it's really interesting to take a look at, there aren't just XX and XY chromosomes. There's a lot of other combinations that can happen, and they're actually not that rare. Klinefelter, I don't know the exact percentage that affects Klinefelter, but as far as XXXY is concerned, it's about 1 in 50,000. Then the condition where a person may have both male and female sex organs, I mentioned that quickly, but that's known as intersex. And a while ago, it was thought that it was only about 0.018% of the population, but now, it's commonly accepted that it makes it about 1.8% of the population that have some form of intersex characteristics.
So I wanted to thank you all, Isaiah, Bunny, and Ada, all of you for putting this together and for answering that first question. We can absolutely take the other questions. First of all, I want to ask, or thank you all for putting together a very clear, clean presentation and presenting it so well. I think my personal opinion is that this is incredibly valuable information for us all to have. And so I think that it's a wonderful way for us as a school board to set an example by learning this and living it. So thank you very much for that. Does anyone else on the board have any questions or comments?
I'd like to offer an expression of gratitude for something that you helped me personally with, which is, I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes I use she, her pronouns, and sometimes I use she, her, they pronouns during Zoom meetings. And that is because as a cis woman, I am also comfortable being identified with neutral pronouns. And I've wondered if that's an appropriate use of the they pronoun in my introduction. And so hearing you attest that, yes, that is one of the ways in which they, them pronouns can be used was actually reassuring for me, and I'm grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
We appreciate it.
I've seen this 3 times and I've learned something new each time. And I value that, and I will continue to ask and build that relationship so I can have that open dialogue and normalize that conversation. And I love the history that Bunny provided, acknowledging that this is not something new. It has historically been within society, and the further we educate, the more we adapt and move forward. So thank you for continuing to educate me.
Is there a place that we can post this on the website or someplace public so that we just people can have it at their fingertips if they have more questions?
Well, it certainly will go on the board's presentation, but we can certainly put it on, you know, our website someplace for students. I'm not sure if you mean like on the homepage or, you know, typically, you know, we have resources for students and staff.
No, I think that's what I meant, was just somewhere where someone could resource it if they had questions or concerns. They would have the information at their fingertips, because it's a really beautiful data-driven piece of work. And so I'd love to see it be a resource in the future.
And I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you. I've had the opportunity to watch you grow up and you guys are awesome. So I appreciate all the work you've done. You're well-spoken. And I learned a lot myself today, so thank you.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to say thank you as well. And it takes a lot of presence to come to a school board meeting on Zoom and present. And you guys did a phenomenal job. I also noticed that Ada is here and wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself if you would like.
I'm Ada Murray and I use they, them pronouns.
Really nice to meet you, Ada.
I do want to note we have a couple of questions in the queue, or a couple of comments in the queue. Those will be comments will be saved for public comment because this is not a workshop where we usually engage in discussion. But we do have another question that I think is relevant to probably more along the lines of the district rather than the presenters, but I will ask it anyway. It's from Gwendy Hastings in Freeland. That is, what age or grade would this conversation or education be appropriate?
I personally feel like we could start it in maybe 5th or 6th grade, just because I remember being in 5th and 6th grade, and it would have been really nice to know more about this. I didn't meet a non-binary person aside from myself until 7th grade, and I wish I had more knowledge going into middle school. So that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, and can I add on to that real quick, please? I completely agree with what Bunny said. I think that in a time like that, 5th and 6th grade, the onset of puberty is a time where a lot of students start to question a lot of things about themselves. I know personally, around that age, I started to question my sexuality. And I think that just providing resources and information about what it means to be non-binary, what it means to be transgender, different pronouns, stuff like that, can be really beneficial for anyone, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. I am a firm believer in continued education, and I think that's really, really important. As far as like how to address a non-binary person, I think that that should be talked about the first time that a child meets a non-binary person. I think just a quick little like, hey, this person, they don't use like he and she, like what you've normally heard. They use they. And I've learned that a lot of the time children are way, 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 way more receptive and more understanding than a lot of older people are. And it can be really helpful just to throw that in. We don't need to talk about all like the nuances and stuff, but just let them know.
Okay, I'd follow the OSB guidelines of what the health curriculum would offer. But I will say on a personal note, as a parent, I've had that conversations with my young daughter. For example, we saw somebody that was androgynous and they had longer hair and she had identified them as he. And I just shifted it and said, and we identified as they. And it was an easy conversation and it's as natural as that.
In my personal opinion, I have also found children to be a lot more receptive than adults. My little brother is 8 and he has used my preferred pronouns and name more than some of the adults in my life. And it's really that easy to teach them. It's just repetitiveness and they get it really quick. So I think that's really cool. That's a cool thing about kids.
Absolutely. My daughter is going into kindergarten this year and she, as far as I can tell, completely understands the different use of pronouns, just what folks prefer.
That's lovely.
I have barking dogs and I apologize, but I just wanted to share an additional perspective as a parent. My children have had non-binary folks in their life since early childhood, and Z, zir, and they, them pronouns were part of our family vocabulary pre-kindergarten. So it is something that can be normalized and talked about within the family as it arises.
Annalisa Pesek from Clinton has a question of, is this presentation available to the public and can you provide your sources, please? And I will note that it will indeed be available on the agenda It is in fact available on the agenda now. And many of the sources were cited in there. If there are some in particular that you're interested in, I'm certainly you could contact the district and we could find that out for you. Are there any other questions from the board?
I saw that Tess left a question, and I do think that this can be normalized. I think if young children have questions about gender and identity, just like any other subject, like how we live on a predominantly white island, and when I was little, I didn't see very many people of color, and I was taught, like, it was my mother and father taught me about that other people look different from us, and it's a similar thing with pronouns and gender and sexuality. And so it is a thing that can be normalized. It's just not something that we've as a society worked on as much as skin color, but we're getting there, and I think eventually it will be normalized. So yes.
And just as a protocol note, I do want to note for T, who asked that question, please include your name and location because we cannot address questions or comments without that. Thank you. Okay, it doesn't sound like there's anything else from the board. So thank you again to all three of you for that well put together presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.